Jason Nichols is a professor at the University of Maryland, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So if
Thank you for having me.
can't make the cut, I mean, unless you agree with the professor I just talked to, who I actually do think makes a really good point. We shouldn't be naming things after people, especially living politicians, whether it's Kennedy, killed a woman, or Robert Byrd, the Klan recruiter, or any of these politicians should not be allowed to name things after themselves. I strongly agree with that. But like McKinley, really? Why is he so sinful?
Well, I think, if we look at his history, he did some things in terms of what he did with the indigenous people, taking their land, giving it to white settlers, breaking up their autonomy. So I think he has some issues in his past. But at the same time, I think it's important for us, and it's interesting, this discussion, because I think I'm going to play the Republican here and say that you had a city council, a local group, who has made a decision for their community. That's what they're elected to do. And yet you and I here in our shirts and ties here in Washington are going to sit here and tell them that what they did was wrong and question.
I feel fully empowered to pass judgment on the decisions that governments make.
Okay, but a local government that you have no... I
mean, I'm allowed to have a view on that, and I do.
Absolutely.
And just because the government is small doesn't mean it doesn't make terrible decisions. I'm not that kind of conservative who thinks that, small government, I mean, there's a lot of tyranny that takes place on city councils. I've certainly seen it, having lived in a small town. But here, I guess, is the point I'm making. We're retroactively judging people selectively. So you wouldn't have any problem with a monument to the Cherokees and the Trail of Tears, I would assume, because they're an oppressed people. But of course, they brought their slaves with them. They're African-American slaves. I'm not attacking the Cherokees. I'm merely pointing out that, history is a lot more complicated than we pretend it is. And you know that, of course, as a professor. So why are we now pretending that everything is in stark black and white and there are good people and there are bad people and nobody in between? That's a lie.
I think, the primary thing when we're talking about presidents and what they've done is that we need to have a dialogue about the totality of what they've done. I'm just saying in this particular case, and the most important point to me is that activists say that they are going to raise the $65,000 that it takes to remove the statue. So it's not even going to be a burden upon the taxpayers.
No, but
it's going to be housed somewhere. They have a veterans place.
It's just your classic kind of Red Guard nonsense where we destroy the past, thinking that that's going to create a new future. It's just stupid. I mean,
Tucker, that's not a destruction of the past.
Well, of course it is.
The past still exists. And they said they're going to move it indoors, just like I said with the Confederate statues.
Nobody is actually offended by this.
That's not true.
Offended by William McKinley?
There's a Native American community 20 miles south of Arcata who said that they don't like seeing this statue.
Okay, we're going to talk to one of them tomorrow. And look, I try to respect people's opinions.
Sure.
But taking down the statue will not improve the life of a single person in that community, as you know. But let me ask you this. As long as that we're using these criteria, why do we have an FDR memorial here in Washington after he literally put in internment camps people on the basis of their skin color? Why do we have that?
I think the
in living memory, by the way. I mean, some of the people who were in those camps are still alive. This wasn't 300 years ago. It was 80 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think you're trying to make an argument that I'm not making, or you're trying to sit here and debate with me on something on a point that I'm not making. What I'm saying here is, just like people may be offended by certain things in certain communities. I don't think we should necessarily force it upon that community to have that statue if they want to remove it. This isn't the
I'm not forcing it on Arcata, and I also think that the marijuana use level is so high in that town that I'm not sure that they'll ever kind of get it together enough to take the statue down. I'm betting on that. But I do think there's a principle here that's worth talking about, and that is, how do we assess figures out of our past? Do we impose the values of the present moment, the transitory values that we have this right moment, on people retroactively, or do we take a broader view and say, a lot of people are heroic? Cesar Chavez, for example, flawed guy, beat up illegal aliens. I don't know, I think he was a net positive to the state of California in his labor organizing. Do you see what I'm saying?
What I'm saying?
We want to distort history for political reasons.
Well, here's what I believe. Why can't we take this McKinley statue and put it somewhere where we can have a dialogue about what he represented in, you know, both the good and the bad.
Because
and that
nobody
would be,
knows anything about McKinley, as you know.
But that would be in a museum. That's where they can learn.
Because nobody actually cares about learning about history, and I bet you $1,000.
And that's a problem, and I don't think
it's a huge problem. I bet you can't find 15 people in America who can tell me 10 things William McKinley did. I honestly think that's true.
I believe that
including the people who are calling
I think the people in Arcata can tell you 10 things that he...
I don't believe that for a second. I really don't. We're going to talk to what I think tomorrow. And I'm going to say, I'm going to sit here in silence as you tell me facts about William McKinley, and I bet you that'll be the shortest conversation ever aired on television. We'll see. Professor, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tucker.